Aloha everyone, and thank you for joining the Hawaii Public Health Training Hui's December training, Getting Ahead of Holiday Stress. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Stephanie Moyer, and I'm the Community Initiatives and Training Coordinator with the Hawaii Public Health Institute. I also work closely with Makamai Namahoe, our Contracts, Grants, and Operations Assistant, as well as the Hawaii Public Health Training Hui Steering Committee, made up of 14 members from our community. Our sponsors and partners for this webinar are the Hawaii Public Health Training Hui, the Western Region Public Health Training Center, and the Public Health Learning Network. We are offering 5 different areas for continuing education credits. The slides will be sent to you with these codes, but please make note of the changes to the codes for this webinar. Regarding receiving credit, I will be sending you a link to the survey following the webinar today. Please have that survey done or evaluation completed by Monday, December 16th, and I will get the certificates to you folks by December 18th. If after that date you have not received your certificate, please feel free to reach out to me or Maka, and you have our email addresses listed there. Regarding continuing nursing education, we have nothing to disclose. We have no relevant financial relationships to disclose for this webinar. For nurses, you do need to complete the online nursing evaluation at the University of Arizona's website. And this webinar's password, or the password for the evaluation, is holidays with a capital H. We are recording the webinar today, and it will be available via our YouTube channel. I'm very pleased to introduce you to our guest trainer today. His name is Dr. Adam Coles, and he is a general, child, and adolescent psychiatrist on Maui. He is clinical director of Hawaii Department of Health, CAMHD, if I can say that, I hope I said that right, Maui Family Guidance Center, and medical director of Pono Maui Residential Eating Disorders Program in Wailuku, Maui. Originally from Colorado, he was an attending child psychiatrist at Denver Health Medical Center's acute psychiatric unit until moving to Maui in 2015. Prior to medical school, he was an architect and engineer before deciding he didn't have enough student loan debt. He enjoys art and outdoor sports, is a level 20 nerd, and sci-fi and fantasy cosplayer. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Adam Coles.
Thank you, Steph. I want to thank Steph and Makamai for flying over here to the Valley Isle to set this up. This is a great venue, I think, for these kind of trainings so that everybody can kind of participate. This is a very important subject area for me. I think it got me thinking a lot. So we'll talk about a few things today, but we want to think about how environmental changes affect us, just in general, but also kind of during this holiday season, which comes to us, with very regular changes in our kind of environmental patterns around us. Think about some of the psychological impacts and stressors that we encounter during the holidays and the season. So we'll kind of pull those apart a little bit. Talk a little bit about kind of cultural meanings and how we can kind of think about those during this season. And throughout, it won't be really sort of clustered at the end. It'll just be kind of throughout. We'll have some ideas for how we can care for ourselves a little bit during the season. So I'm told that you guys can fire in questions throughout, and Steph and Makamai will help me out. I want to give a special thanks to MEO, Maui Economic Opportunity, for hosting us physically today and giving us the bandwidth to make this successful. So I hope it all comes through smoothly, but as Steph said, this will be available online in recorded fashion, so you'll be able to go back if you want. So let's get going. So some of the core questions I started thinking about when I was invited to do this presentation were, how do we pick up on seasonal changes? What signals do we receive around us? And not just on the radio or the TV when they start talking about Black Friday, but what other kinds of changes do we see even unconsciously around us? And have we ourselves, through technology or the built environment, changed our signals and what we receive around us seasonally that can kind of mess up what we would normally perceive in the environment around us, that we would make changes to adjust for? Or do we have work challenges? Now, many of us in the medical field end up having to work different shifts, whether night shifts or float or cross-cover shifts, that put us in a work environment at a time when most people are actually trying to sleep. And how do we adapt to some of those changes? And what have some of our artificial environmental changes done to hinder our normal evolutionary adaptive changes? What kind of social and psychological stress factors begin to impact us during the season, both seasonally and with the holidays? And then how can we cope? And as I said, we'll kind of talk about that throughout. So it's funny, when I started looking into this, the idea of a holiday, stress pattern, and the holiday syndrome is definitely not a new thing. Way back in 1955, Dr. James Cattell, or Cattell, I think it's actually pronounced, it's hard to find, referred to an already historically well-known syndrome. So probably, as early as the late 19th century, this was talked about, that folks experience changes in mood, stress, helplessness, irritability, changes in their sleep pattern, and worrying or ruminating about the upcoming holidays, as well as past experiences, whether from their youth or earlier life experiences. So this is not a new thing, and we all kind of cope in different ways. But this was a good reminder to me that it probably is a good idea for all of us to think about this as the season approaches every year, to make sure we don't fall into kind of unhealthy patterns. Just a little bit of brief review. Our mood is a complex result, and it's a kind of real-time process that comes about through the interaction of our limbic system, which is composed of several deep structures in the brain, as well as our cortex, which is our kind of conscious, intelligent mind, informed by our memory, as well as sensory stimuli that are coming in. And this is where that kind of environmental as well as psychological stressors that come to us and come through our sensory system trigger memory and trigger some of these environmental cues where we get some of these mood changes. But I just wanted to, this won't be on the test, by the way, none of this anatomy is going to be on the test, but it bears reminding that it's a very complex system. And so it doesn't always have simple answers. In general, our kind of activation state, our state of anxiety or calm or activation, is a balance of these two complex systems, the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is how we generally think of the system that revs us up a little bit, gets us ready for action. Some folks like to refer to as kind of the fight or flight system that gets activated when we're threatened, or when we have a survival kind of situation or a trauma that's occurred, and that can be reactivated again in the case of trauma in a re-experiencing kind of way. The parasympathetic nervous system tends to calm us down a little bit, slow the heart rate rather than rev it up, slow our respiratory rate, and deepen our inhalation and exhalation cycles. And so in the ideal case, these are in a relative balance, sort of going back and forth, but not on these giant swings. And just we notice during certain stressful periods of time, those swings can get bigger, or they can get really tilted over toward the kind of sympathetic side, so we're more activated, a little bit more stressed out. Stress hormones like cortisol and other things are at a higher state. Our breathing is elevated, our heart rate is higher, we're sweating, things like that. So the goal is to bring this system kind of back to balance. And here's just kind of a more graphical representation with a cute little snake chasing a guy. Of course, that assumes that he doesn't like snakes and it's not his pet, but just assume that that's what that means. And we want that to be on the whole in balance. It's never kind of static. That would be, the stasis would be not a living system. So there's always some movement. So we're going to talk about several sources of stress and signals on the body, such as changes in light, temperature, and other environmental cues. What is cabin fever? That was a big thing when I was growing up. Worry if you're going to have cabin fever or not. Changes in work patterns or school holidays, especially if you're a parent or a caregiver of someone who's a student, such as an adult. So a lot of us went back to school as adults. I did. So I think a lot of us now are kind of thinking a lot about how does an adult student who might also have a job, including a full-time job, balance these things, and their partner or caregivers, how do they help take care of them, and what additional stressors do the adult students have? Money, of course, major impact of stress during the season for a lot of reasons we'll talk about. The impact of and the place of culture and spirituality during the season, which sometimes seems to get a little bit lost. And then stresses of travel and family. So a lot of people assume, I have a lot of friends and family on the continent. I'm originally from Colorado, as Steph mentioned, and a lot of people sort of give me trouble because they say, well, there aren't any seasons in Hawaii. Well, that's not true. They're just a little bit different and more subtle. But I was amused. This is a picture I took actually the other day of some big presence outside the Queen Ka'ahumanu Mall here on the island. And if you notice, actually, the wind is blowing and there's some clouds in the background. So we were actually having a bit of rain and wind. And that is a very common seasonal experience here. It's wetter, it's cooler. People here say it's cold. It's cooler for sure. But it was still kind of fun because there's not a dusting of snow on the ground or anything. But just behind me taking this picture on Haleakala Mountain, our dormant volcano, you do get some snow. So you can go up and see snow if you really want to during the deep season sometimes. But in general, everywhere that's not the equator experiences a change in light patterns. And that's caused, as we all hopefully know, by the tilt of the Earth's rotational axis during the season relative to our path around the sun. So in Hawaii, this is not as pronounced at 20 degrees north latitude as it is, say, in northern Michigan, which is way up more like, 41, 42, 45 degrees north latitude. Or even farther north where you get a 24-hour kind of daylight cycle during the summer and very, very short days during the winter. So here I wanted to figure out, okay, how much change do we experience? So in Hawaii, in general, we do have 2.5 hours less daylight at the winter solstice, which is that third week in December 21st, versus June, the summer solstice, which was more than I kind of expected. And it turns out that the impact we all feel in terms of energy, mood, and just in generally noticing the change is most prominent in the morning hours. So when we wake up in the morning and it's still dark. I just experienced that this morning, getting up to get ready for work. It was just dark. Barely a hint of color on the horizon at my normal waking time. And I was already thinking about this presentation with you guys. And in June, it's totally different. It's almost already daylight. People are out and about. So there's a very different energy level. and it takes me longer to get started at work a little bit. I have to take in more of this stuff. Coffee, just trust me, it's coffee. Before I get going. From my old job, where I used to design buildings for a living, I worked for a while in environmental science and what's called kind of green design or sustainable design. We used a lot of these things, and this is actually a real-time sun path chart that shows the path of the sun throughout the year between December and June, the winter and summer solstices. And the way you use it is you would actually, it's sort of as if you're looking up into the dome, the sky dome, and you look at the angle of the sun at a given time of year. So it's sort of upside down and backwards. I apologize for that, but that's how we all learn to use these things when planning. It's sort of like a star chart in that way. So I actually input our latitude here at the University of Oregon site, and it just drew this for me. It's a really cool tool. And you can use this to actually design, say, sunshades for your house that will shade your walls or windows in the summer, but allow sunlight in the winter because they stick out just enough to get that high angle sun in the summer. But then when the sun drops to that lower angle in the wintertime, it'll come right in. You'll get that daylight into your interior space, and you'll get that natural light and that extra warming. If you live at an altitude, where that temperature change, is significant for you. So we do this a lot in the world of building, and it can really affect our mood as well, getting that natural light during those winter hours into our interior spaces. It's interesting to me how often these things aren't used in building design and in housing design, even now, even when they're so easy to pull up on the internet to do this. But this is something that's a very simple thing to do, and it doesn't require a lot of money. It's just how do you adjust your sun angle and shading. So one of the other challenges we face is how much artificial light exists in our environment that we have created for ourselves. Well, what's the problem with that? I think all of us have a kind of intuitive sense that artificial light is not as nice feeling as natural sunlight and daylight. And the best light bulbs have what's called a solar spectrum, or what we call a colored temperature in environmental design that closely matches the color temperature of sunlight to try and get closer. But I'm sitting in a room here, with kind of regular fluorescent lighting, and it doesn't feel as nice as if we were able to open the shades and catch a bit of sunlight. It's cloudy today here on Maui, so that wouldn't be quite as, sunshiny. But one of the problems we have is all of the urban street light that can come into our windows when we're trying to go to sleep. If we live in a very urbanized area, sound is part of that too. I didn't put sound into this presentation, but sound pollution is a growing problem, and it's worth a whole other presentation, especially in urban areas. And that's where good windows and doors and other aspects of design can really help us get these kind of nice, quiet, and dark places to sleep. We evolved in our early days with probably very dim firelight after we invented or discovered fire. And before that, it was just daylight and darkness. So our brains, in terms of relative time, haven't spent that long with consistent, bright artificial light. Up until the late 19th century, artificial light consisted of gaslight, flame, so a lighting level, several times dimmer than our modern electric lamps. And I don't know about you guys if you've switched to LED light bulbs for environmental purposes, but those bulbs are much brighter for a given wattage. I just replaced a few in my house, and you flip the switch on an LED bulb, and it's so much brighter and in some ways harsher. And I didn't really expect that until I started really replacing some of these bulbs. And probably we're going to need some more data on that. So, what are the biological ways that it impacts us? Well, melatonin is a simple peptide, a short protein produced by a gland in our brain in response to declining light levels as evening comes on. Uh, it's termed a natural supplement. You can buy it over the counter because it's produced by our brain uh, as a signal to the onset of night and to prepare our brains for sleep. So that's why some people benefit from taking exogenous or supplemental melatonin in the evening. It turns out that there are two populations that often, or not uncommonly, as we love to say in medicine for a double negative, uh, don't quite produce enough melatonin with the onset of twilight. And those are teens and elderly folks. We're not quite sure why that is. And then there are other populations of folks who just don't produce very much. So that can be very helpful. And as far as we know, melatonin taken orally is pretty safe. It doesn't interact with other medications, and it's a good way to kind of begin to reset your cycle for day and night. I do recommend that folks do not drink caffeine anywhere near taking melatonin. They oppose each other. That if you're going to do that, don't look at a cell phone or get on the computer, because that's the other real problem that we're encountering with a normal day-night cycle is staring at our electronics after twilight. So unless it's super important or you have a kind of night light function on your phone or iPad or computer, and even then, I'm not super happy with those. See if you can get your business done on your electronics and then off. I tried one of these night light functions on my cell phone. It was fine. Um, I didn't. It's the N of one study, as we say in medicine, testing myself. It certainly didn't do me any harm, but then the program wanted me to start paying money every month or so to keep going, so I deinstalled it. But if you can find a free one that seems to work, it basically just dims those blue white LEDs in your display. So all you're getting is kind of this red amber sort of color. So you won't be able to see like pretty color pictures, but you'll be able to answer an email. It's better to just turn it off. So urban light, before I came to medicine, I worked with a couple different cities on trying to change our street lighting to a less polluting kind of, bulb just hanging in space with glass, jar around it, into a more shaded, shrouded kind of structure that would just light the path. That's what streetlights are for, is so that people can drive their car safely and walk safely and not get accosted. But there's no reason for light to go out horizontally or certainly up into the sky where it would block the stars. We have beautiful night skies here on Maui, and that part of that is because we don't have a huge amount of urban light pollution. But if you live down in town like Kahului or Wailuku here, Honolulu, I imagine there's a fair amount of light pollution. You get out of town and you can still see the Milky Way. And I don't have data to support this, but I have to believe that seeing the stars in the night sky is somehow good for us. I certainly like it. So if you are the active kind of person who likes to work with your town, work with your municipalities, advocating for dark sky initiatives can be very helpful to you, helpful to all of us in our environment. But then if we do run into things like seasonal affective disorder or seasonal affective disorder light, there's a pretty solid body of evidence that tells us that light therapy, typically in the morning, and we can bring these things to work. You can wear them. There are these boxes we used to prescribe in the clinic, early on in my training, before they developed the cool kind of light shade things that you can wear. And it would light up your kind of workspace and rebalance your daylight cycle in the workspace. Interestingly, a recent study demonstrated benefits of vitamin D supplementation that seemed to work even better than daylight itself. But it was only one study and it wasn't very large. I thought I'd mention that. And we know that daylight spectrum lighting in general, in our houses and our workplaces, is associated with improved mood and productivity. So as I mentioned, in Hawaii, temperatures don't fluctuate quite as much, but they do. But in many other places in the world, in the country, the average temperature shifts massively. Where I'm from in Colorado, it can go from 80 degrees one day and sunny and to -20 the next day and full-on blizzard conditions. And I'm not even joking. Uh, and that variability, people from that part of the country are sort of used to. But in other parts of the country, after a certain time, my mom lives in Upper Michigan, for example, the temperature goes down and it just doesn't really come up again until about April. And if you live in a place for a while, humans are very adaptable and can adapt to these kind of changes. But that doesn't mean they don't have an impact. So planning ahead, recognizing, okay, it's time to get my storm windows put in. It's time to break out my sweaters and things like that ahead of time so that you're not sort of running behind all of the time. Here on Maui, we do have enough variability that people run around with several different kinds of clothing in their trunk. And that really touches my Colorado heart, because that's what people from Colorado do all the time, is they have about 3 different seasons at any one time in their car. And I think just being aware of your environment around you, and that's where, sometimes our artificial environments can fool us. Everything is temperature controlled, humidity controlled in our offices. Then we walk outside and we just get this shock. So it's really those shock moments and the abrupt changes that get us. We're very adaptable when it's just slow enough, or we can alleviate some of those temperature changes and slow it down a little bit. The old, it's not really a myth, the cliche of if you're cold, put a hat on is absolutely true. Our heads are far more vascular than other parts of our body. And so if you throw a baseball cap on and you're cool, you will experience a significant increase in your perceived temperature and your real temperature. Your core temperature will not drop down as quickly. And Steph and Makani were just actually putting on sweaters while I was talking. It was interesting because I think part of that is awareness, right? I start talking about temperature and suddenly we check in with ourselves. So maybe you were just listening to this and going, "Oh wait, I'm hot," or I'm too cold. I'm going to put something on. And that's exactly what we need to be doing, is checking in with ourselves and our awareness. Have I been sitting around freezing for 2 hours and not doing anything about it? So kind of regularly checking in with yourself. Excuse me. The experience of going outside and exercise is so beneficial, however. Even bad weather, unless it presents a real danger to us, shouldn't stop us from going outside at least a little bit. And this is actually another picture I took of my daughter and a friend of hers, walking outside. It was in the winter here on Maui, so it was one of those dry periods we get here in the winter. So not a lot of rainfall, things were crunchy. It felt almost like fall on the continent, though not quite. But it was a really good time to go. We'd all been feeling a little bit just sort of bored, and that kind of case of the blahs, and everybody just decided it was time to go outside. And I think even if the snow's falling, sometimes it'd be really nice to go for a walk in the snow. Just stay safe. And again, you will adapt to the temperature band that you live in. Just give yourself the time to do so. But we do, on average, experience less time outdoors in those winter months. And that's okay, as long as it doesn't drop down to 0 and you get the cabin fever that I talked about a few minutes ago. What is so special about nature? The environmental effect on our mood and mind is kind of a particular interest of mine, and I have a whole other presentation I've done on it. When I was digging into it, there's this kind of intuitive sense that nature is good for us. The Japanese have actually done quite a bit of research into this, and it's why they have a bunch of forests and parks that are special reserves, with areas that people can walk and go and be and meditate. Um, but we do have a growing body of evidence that there is something about nature, not just daylight and not just plants. Plants are good for us, and daylight is good for us. And if you have plants in your space, like in your workspace or home, those can be good if you're not allergic to them. But there's something about being in sort of kind of unspoiled nature, or even a park, um, that is good for us. And I have a definition here that you can see. I won't read out loud for you. I hate it when folks read slides to me. But if any questions come up, let me know. But we do know that when folks who actually have, psychiatric diagnoses of depression, anxiety, ADHD, PTSD, have a planned regular nature exposure or nature contact, those symptoms do improve on self-rated scales. We also know that naturalistic soundscapes, like running water, rustling branches of trees, that don't sound like, hurricanes, are calming to most people. Some people like thunderstorm sounds. Some people don't. That's a particular area of interest. Some people don't like the kind of thunder surprise. But rainfall seems to be pretty calming to most people. Although it makes some people, by self-report, have to want to go to the bathroom. So just got to watch out for that. When we think about work and the holidays, I don't know if anybody knows this picture, but this comes from the early pre-talkie movie Metropolis, and it had just this beautiful, terrifying version of workers in a giant factory kind of working. And I'm sure that many of us have felt this way, just toiling away, a cog in the machine. But I think most of us know that holiday schedules at work can be very stressful, even if we take time off, and sometimes, especially if we take time off, because our work requirements don't seem to go away or go down. We just have to get it done before we leave and when we get back. So things either wait and we have to catch up. And then if we work in a job where certain cross-cover aspects have to be done, like shift work, where somebody has to take your shift, or someone has to cover your patients if you're a clinician like me, you're taking on additional duty to cover your coworker during their holiday. And hopefully you can work a trade. We'll talk about that. And then, children are home from school frequently, and they may complain about being bored. I always like to challenge kids with, okay, what does that mean for your creativity, your imagination? What are you going to do? It's not my job to entertain you. We're not going to just stream and binge movies and TV shows all the time. So that's a challenge for kind of going back to basics and getting into books and getting into art and making stuff. There's a lot of things that often need doing during the holidays. And what if work becomes that place where you feel sort of skilled and empowered and not lonely, because maybe you don't live near family, or there isn't much family around, or you're single, and maybe you're happily single, but it can still be sort of stressy to, yes, be happily single, but all the ads on TV, on the radio, and you just go to the store to pick up something, and there's all these displays, get your loved one XYZ, buy your wife or girlfriend or boyfriend's, this or that. And it can really give you the sense that there are assumptions about people's relationships and what you should be doing. And my reflection on that is, don't should yourself. There is no requirement to be in certain kinds of relationships or be in a certain place in life during the holidays, nor any other time. But this can be a time when all the messages socially around us are kind of stressing us out, like, oh, I'm not where I should be, or I'm not visiting my family. We'll get to that. So regarding work, dug into a little bit some recommendations from a couple different places. My own professional organization has some, which was kind of nice to see. They didn't used to have these, but um, at work, if you get along with your coworkers, it's fun to share food and celebrations, bring things in. I always bring leftovers from holiday meals, especially desserts, and those are popular. Um, Sharing the workload. So if someone has to be cross-covered, what if not just one other person cross-covers, but what if 2 or 3 people share that cross-cover job, and that way the impact is lessened among more than one person. Trading holiday time. So we used to do this in my old group back in Denver. We would just kind of rotate through the holidays. So unless someone really, really, really always wanted to say, hey, I'm good, I don't need to be off for Christmas, doesn't bother me, I will always take Christmas. We actually had one coworker like that for a long time. She didn't care at all. And it was sort of great. It was a gift to everybody else. But in case that, a person like that isn't there, then trading and rotating can be really nice. And that way everybody gets a little piece of the holidays. If you're a supervisor, maybe it's time to step down off the mountain and help out your coworkers. And also, if supervisors are covering each other, maybe giving them an extra hand, especially if you're kind of a senior, line worker who's, like a team supervisor or shift supervisor, and helping your manager out with some of their stuff. A lot of times we try and catch up on paperwork at the holidays, and just helping with some of that stuff can be really de-stressing. Plan holiday schedules well ahead of time. I think everybody knows this, but it always is difficult because some of us don't even know what's going to happen. Throughout the year, throughout our lives, we should work at leaving work at work and not bringing it home. Changing your clothes when you get home out of work clothes. I work on this with my own family sometimes. My wife still sometimes wears her ID like 9 o'clock at night. I'm like, hey, take off your state ID. This isn't the Department of Health, get rid of that thing. And that can really help you. It physically takes work off of you to do things like that, and then get into your goofy looking Christmas pajamas or whatever. And I like to suggest that people really be open to the idea that people celebrate in different ways or not celebrate. To be okay with someone not doing Black Friday, and that's okay too, or that not everything is about Christmas, but there are other holidays, and taking advantage of that, like several holidays also have amazing food associated with them, so you could actually benefit by having some amazing things to eat. I'm just saying. And school's out, I talk about this a little bit. Just because school is maybe out doesn't mean kids can't help. It used to be when I was little, my mom tasked my sister and I with doing most of the decorating. And once we figured out, how not to electrocute ourselves, or, my sister stopped taping me to myself with the tape, we were able to get a lot of stuff done. And I was just at the store the other day getting a birthday card for a family friend, and noticing that most cards are really expensive. Like they were all $5 or more, and they're bad. They're just terrible. So I feel like I just went and bought a bunch of blank cards, and then we just make our own. I just had enough of that, but that's just a personal decision. But those kinds of things, engaging kids and the whole family in some of these things, instead of just letting them cook on their cell phones or iPads, but really engaging in some of these hands-on things. There's accumulating data that actually engaging in craft and artwork is really good for our mood as well, especially at stressful times. And can older children look after younger children? Absolutely, including cousins. That's totally fine. So I think that's something that's absolutely applicable, especially at these big family gatherings. Money tends to be a big stressor during the holidays as well, and not just the lack of it. but there's accumulating data that spending money to buy stuff at the holidays doesn't actually increase our happiness or sense of well-being at all. It just is something that we culturally seem to have get caught up in, or gotten caught up in, as a thing that we should do. And I'm here to challenge that. Not to tell you that if that's cool and you love that and it's part of what you do and you enjoy it, have at it, absolutely. But also to give ourselves permission to not spend a ton of money, um, and take the opportunity to, have kids again join and make meals at home, or enjoy some of those traditional foods that your parents or grandparents made when you were little, that might be culturally, appropriate, or have some kind of spiritual attachment. Such as I was saying, there's things that money can buy and things that money can't buy, and time is one of those things, as far as we know, that money cannot buy. And what if we didn't really spend extra money over the holidays at all? I wanted to talk about company and loneliness, and this is just a funny picture that I took. We were actually on the train outside of Denver International Airport. This is my daughter. And the train had happened to stop. She was wiped out because we'd flown home to visit family from Maui. And so this was 16 hours into our trip, and we had just arrived back after going through LA. And she's had this look on her face. That's a Frappuccino she has. Yes, I give my child caffeine. Sue me. But, and the train stopped. Outside the windows, this sign that says drain. And it was just so perfect. I had to shoot that picture. And then I told her about it because you can't spoil it. But that is, I think, expresses to me how a lot of us feel at this time of year, just sapped. But that we have to do those things that recharge our batteries that we do throughout the year. But sometimes I think we forget because we get caught up in the rat race of the holidays. So keep doing those things that are healthy for you. And also to say that it's totally fine to be alone at the holidays if you're not feeling lonely in a negative way. But that it can be really healthy to go and get some alone time to recharge your batteries, and that's okay too. And don't let people, give you grief for that, because it can be very, very self-care related, especially if you're a sort of extroverted introvert like me, where you can socialize and be with people for a while, but then you have to recharge. But yes, some people do experience a really terrible sense of loneliness every year at this time, also throughout the year. Obviously, several populations are at high risk. The elderly is definitely one group, disabled folks, chronically ill family members, those without living family. Also, children and adult children who are away at school. So I experienced a couple of really long holidays when I was in college because I couldn't afford to get home for the holidays. And managed to get together with a few other friends. And it wasn't as amazing as the holidays at Hogwarts are in the Harry Potter movies, but it was pretty good. We went to the dining hall, they still had food going, and they had holiday meals, and we got together. It can be very hard, though, if you're really feeling that crushing sense of loneliness, to motivate yourself to step out, reach out to friends or neighbors. I know quite a few people who get an enormous sense of satisfaction from volunteering during the holidays. They go down to the homeless shelter, food bank, and get a sense of connectedness and gratitude from folks who are out in the community, and make new friends and make new connections with people doing that. So I really am a huge fan of that. And also joining a group that does a thing you enjoy. Pretty big fan of that, and I do recommend that for folks also who are feeling lonely throughout the year or looking for, a partner potentially. I'm not a huge fan of just dating sites. I've noticed a lot of people do get into healthy relationships by finding people who do what they do and enjoy what they enjoy. So if you're waiting for whatever reason to start something that you're curious about, whether it's to learn to play piano, to sing in a choir, to start woodworking, There's no time like the present. You're going to be the same age a year from now anyway, so you might as well get going with it. And also getting out into nature. So there's a lot of hiking groups and things like that. Cross-country skiing, snowshoeing, for those places that get a fair amount of snowfall. It's amazing fitness, and all the data says that exercise is amazing for mood. It's this mountain of evidence that exercise improves mood in the adolescent, child, adult, and elderly population across the board. Frequently as good or better than medication, and it has no side effects as long as you're safe. So medical aspects of the holidays. When I was digging into that 1955 paper on the holiday syndrome, I ran into holiday heart syndrome, which I didn't know was a title for a thing. But apparently a certain number of the population sort of binge drink a little bit at the holidays. We all know that. But a certain subpopulation of them have an increased risk of cardiac arrhythmias due to the sudden influx of alcohol and maybe other things during the holidays, especially if they're not really big drinkers the rest of the year. Also, I work with several populations that are high risk for or have substance use disorders. And for folks who are in recovery, the holidays can be a very stressful time and a high-risk area of relapse. So you have to be really careful about the stimuli, the behavior that you're exposing yourself to around you if you're in a sobriety program, to control kind of those triggers. Even if it doesn't lead to a relapse, it can still just be very stressful if you're surrounded by a bunch of folks who are drinking. Loneliness, as well as conflict with friends, family, and coworkers can have a similar effect. So I like to recommend to people who are in recovery and who are in treatment or maintenance that you schedule some extra time ahead of the holidays and going into them to kind of preload yourself and get ready and do some planning and preload self-care activities into your schedule. Like, I'm going to go hike, I'm going to go do this, I'm going to go to attend this group, and that's going to help me maintain. And then if you do run into stress during the holidays, whether it's a family visit, they come to you or you go to them, or there's a relationship conflict that happened unplanned for, schedule some extra time to process that kind of stuff after, so a relapse doesn't happen. That being said, one of the things I keep seeing on social media and other places is, the family conflict thing. That can be very stressful. This is a picture that I took. This is a pop culture replica of the Iron Throne that I made for the Maui AIDS Foundation for their fundraiser. I didn't use a picture of HBO's because I didn't want to deal with licensing problems, and I made this thing, and it's my picture, so I thought, why not? But are there more conflicted families than there are in Game of Thrones? I don't know. They were struggling. They needed therapy. And maybe it is a time to reapproach some things and get some healing. Maybe it's a time to change relationships a little bit. It's possible, but I think that it's a personal choice, but it can be a place to strengthen bonds and reconnect with people that you haven't seen in a while, and maybe everyone has gone down the path a little bit and is in a different place. So it can be a really nice time to have some of those connections. I'm staring down the barrel of some holiday travel coming up. So already, my heart rate is probably up at baseline. A lot of us who live in Hawaii have family on the continent. Notice I'm not saying the mainland. I think the mainland is a mean word because Maine implies alternative, but Hawaii is pretty important too. So I say continent. That's just a personal thing. So are people coming out to visit you in Hawaii to say, oh man, I'm going to have a vacation and visit you during the holidays? Or are you flying to, a state somewhere or another country to visit family? Even the other direction, around the Pacific Rim, many families are traveling. Families I work with are traveling to the Philippines or Samoa and other places to visit, and the airports are full and flights are being changed. And we were just talking about that today, that flights are already starting to get a little unpredictable. So if sometimes we don't have a choice, and that is what it is, but sometimes if you do, you can maybe move your travel ahead so that you're doing it beforehand, or later, and so you're doing it after. What if everyone travels somewhere completely different? If you really don't like going back to Ohio, for example, I'm not saying anything bad about Ohio, but if you really don't like it, maybe you can all meet somewhere else that everyone likes. And maybe that's a challenge for certain family members who can't travel or financially, but if it's available, consider it. A friend of mine was just talking about his family all meeting up at Lake Tahoe. They were able to all kind of put it together and use frequent flyer miles and share them. And it took some doing, but it turned out to be one of the great family gatherings they had. They won't be able to do it every year, but I thought it was a really well done kind of plan. And then it is always a choice. And it's very personal about how you spend your holiday time, and with what family, especially if you live in a divided family, how you carve up that time or alternate holidays. This year, 2019 with this family, and 2020 with that family. And I think trying to keep it as simple as possible is the best way to avoid stress. In the pile of consumerism and the push to buy things on Cyber Monday, I think a lot of times the spiritual and faith aspects of the holidays can get lost. And I'm so not the first person to say that, but what do we do about it? It's been, this time of year has been a thing since way before we had writing. We noticed there was the shortest day of the year before we had speech. And so the winter solstice has been marked by humans for at least 20,000 years, but it has now been overlaid with so many social and cultural and financial and consumerist ideas that sometimes peeling all those layers down and reminding ourselves, what is it all about, is maybe a thing we could do, and rediscovering what is the meaning for us. Whether it's a faith-based meaning, or whether you're kind of marking time as a cycle of the year, and what does it mean for me? Does it mean that I want to try something new in the coming year? Does it mean something for me and my family, that we want to try something different in how we communicate? Or do I want to try a new faith? And that's that may be an opportunity for us if we've been thinking about it. That we've been thinking, or I want to get back to a faith that I've kind of lost contact with. And I hear that a lot, that folks tell me in clinic, I've wanted to get back to my faith, but I haven't found a church that's a fit, and that can be hard. So maybe starting to reach out before the holidays so that you have a community to go to that you feel comfortable with can be a really big move for a lot of people. And that's it for me. I'm happy to chat and answer questions that anyone has. This is a shortened bibliography. I had a longer one, and then I somehow deleted my entire bibliography page, so I started rebuilding it. But I really appreciate your time. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you have a really safe and happy holiday season. Mahalo.
All right. So don't go too far, because we're going to do a couple of question and answers. So there was one question that one of the participants asked. She said she's on the windward side of Oahu, and this can be for other attendees as well, but if anyone knows of a nice kupuna support group, so I'm not sure if you know of any on the windward side of Oahu.
Well, I have to apologize. I don't specifically know a lot on Oahu per se. That's a thing that actually folks who don't live in Hawaii, I don't think really have a good sense of, is how each island is so different. And that the resources are very different, island to island. Each So the islands are organized as counties too. So Maui County covers Maui proper, the island, as well as Molokai and Lanai. But the others are, Hawaii, the Big Island has its own kind of county. Each county has an office on aging, which is a really good resource, I think, to go to for folks in that community to see what resources are out there, groups, things like that, to seek out support, especially during this time of year. The other places I've seen here on Maui, and I have to believe it's similar on Oahu, is our elder care and elder housing communities. We have a couple here on island. They have groups and activities for seniors. You don't have to live there. They have classes. They have support groups. They have AA meetings. All in their community centers. And so those centers can be really good places to reach out to. Also, the community colleges are really great resources. So Maui, University of Hawaii Maui College campus has quite a few classes, art classes, crafts, as well as classes that talk about these kinds of things and get people hooked up into support communities. So I'd reach out there as well. I don't know what exactly exists on the windward side. But I think the Office on Aging is a really good place to reach out to, and your local community center. So we have 3 of those, the 4 actually here, easily accessible central Maui. There's Kihei, and there's Wailuku, and then there's Pukalani just up the hill, and Makawao also up the hill. And those community centers have a lot of things going on all throughout the year, and especially during the holidays. So those are also good places to go to for those kinds of things. Do you want to turn or just leave it with me? Okay, so we'll have other questions narrated in.
And actually, for those on the phone, there were a couple of other recommendations that have come in, and it looks like it only came to the panelists. So okay. I'll just quickly read through those. So Puohala Senior Center near Castle High School was recommended. Check out classes at Castle Medical Center. Windward Senior Daycare. I'm not sure if they have some resources. And then Aloha United Way 211 website and phone line is a good resource for health and helping services statewide.
I agree completely. United Way is a huge resource.
Yeah.
I wish I'd thought of that myself. They're a huge resource here. And I don't know how public transportation works on Oahu. I mean, I know certain things are interesting. We have limited public bus services here, but we also have additional bus services that serve the elder community. And MEO here is part of that as well. So there may be ways for elders in our community to get some help getting to and fro different places. Thank you.
One more recommendation came in, 2 more now. So one is district parks offer classes, and then elderlyaffairs.com has a support group listing. And then another one that I actually thought of was the Y. So like the YMCA on the windward side, I know it's a great resource. I don't know about elderly classes or resources specifically, but I know they have great programs.
Yeah, I agree completely. Really good resources. We have a Y here. They tend to focus more on youth, but I think that those are great resources. Also, the Boys and Girls Club, they have a lot of times during the holidays that can be helpful, especially for those kids that are out of school, need a little bit extra care. For those working parents, Boys and Girls Clubs can be really helpful resource there.
Okay, so this is more of a statement, but it says, agree the elderly, disabled, and chronically ill may have a more difficult challenges during holidays. Let's not forget the caregivers, especially Absolutely. Primary caregivers. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about
caregiver fatigue, which I like better than burnout. I don't know why, but caregiver fatigue / burnout is a thing. It's a big deal. Um, and I think this is throughout the year, but it can be particularly difficult at holidays, especially if you're trying to plan family activities. Um, Generally, we found in my family, not even as a clinician, that locations of activities, family get-togethers are generally governed by the least mobile person in the family, and that is kind of what it is. I I think it's really appropriate to challenge different ages within the family to do what they can that's appropriate for their age level and the culture. Um, in some cultures, like my mother's, grandkids often help take care of grandparents, uh, and the other way around. Uh, and I find that that's very similar in some ways to local culture as well. Um, but different families, use and these use different family members' time in different ways in that way. But I think that that's something to think about: is who can, or how can everyone in the family kind of band together and all contribute, so that all of that stuff doesn't land on one person. That's what I see a lot, is like one adult parent, ends up being responsible for 3 4 different, major people's care, including children, grandparents, things like that, and really trying to divide that up a little bit and de-stress that primary caregiver. Also, it might be handy to, even if you can't afford it throughout the year, but to maybe get a little bit of extra in-home nursing, so that planning, cooking, things like that can happen. Just to give a little bit extra set of hands to help with things, help with transfers, toileting, things like that during this busy part of the season, even if you can't do it the rest of the year. Really great point. Thank you.
There was a comment that came into the, it looks like St. Francis caregiver, or there's going to be a St. Francis caregiver class, caregiver challenges on the holidays on December 14th. So I guess if anyone is interested, they should check out that training.
Excellent.
Another question came in. It says, how do you help children understand holiday stress that a parent may be experiencing?
Yeah, really good question. I think I would approach it, well, I do approach it from kind of many of these different aspects, and some of it depends on the age and developmental state, of the child. So for instance, younger children, sharing, what is the family belief system about the holiday that's coming? Is it Christmas? Is it Hanukkah? Is it the winter solstice? That you're celebrating in a different way, and then what is our shared meaning in our family about it? So that there's a sense of, why is this even a thing? Like, I remember my daughter asked me this is many years ago. She was super excited about school and like being there with friends. So she was sort of upset that they had a winter break and weren't going to be at school because it was like playtime. Like, why do I have to, not be at school? I don't get that anymore. Interestingly, she's not upset about not being at school. It's weird, but so sharing, why is it a thing and what is our belief system? It kind of goes back to that thing I was talking about, where why are these even important at all? And I think sharing that importance and that family story about what does this mean to us gives that foundation, that sense of context for children to come from. And then later on, they'll decide what it means for them. And then the next layer is, okay, well, what does that mean for us? What are we going to do? Are we seeing family? Are we inviting friends over who are kind of island orphans? None of us have family on the island. Are we going to have a shared meal and celebrate in our own way? And I think talking about consumerism at a very young age is important. And what does that mean? And how much are we going to join that thing? I have no problem with gifts. It's how much are we going to decide to get enrolled in that whole thing about, you know, just buying stuff. Does it have to be about that? Yeah, I'm wearing my opinion on my sleeve here, but I feel like it's less healthy than many other ways of celebrating the season. And can families volunteer together? You know, we have some friends that we joined last year because they went and you know, served meals to homeless at the homeless shelters down here, and it just felt much more like we did something that had an impact instead of just bought stuff on Amazon. Uh, so really, I think engaging children as participants in the decision making too, and not just treating everything like a foregone conclusion that, you know, they're going to have the latest and greatest PlayStation or whatever. Um, I think that it would increase all of our enjoyment if children remain part of it. And then maybe our friends and our community, if we're in a faith or spiritual community, can be part of that. And kids will be talking about it with their friends too, what it means to them. Um, and they can really help give the meaning back to the season rather than us just sort of delivering it like a finished product. It can be a process. Hope that's an answer.
Does anybody else have any other questions? Feel free to type them into the chat box or into the question and answer section.
All right. Well, we'll have a few minutes, but I just really want to thank everybody for joining us. This to me is a little bit new. Last year, I had my first kind of webinar like this, and I really like the format. The one thing I miss is kind of seeing everybody. You know, I'm a psychiatrist, so I'm used to talking to people face to face, seeing expressions and the eye contact. But it's really been great, you know, to have Stefan McConaughey here with me, and that helps give that human presence, you know, speaking of loneliness. So I'm not lonely on the computer here. But you know, this is how a lot of education is going to happen. So I really, you know, my hat is off to all of you for being a part of this and joining in. And if you're enjoying lunch while getting some, you know, continuing education credit, well done. This is how it should always be done. Continuing ed is a thing that we in medicine, we all have to do all the time, and it should be low impact and it should be low cost. If not free, I think it should be free as much as possible. So, you know, absolutely have a great season.
All right, thank you, everyone. Wait, it looks like we might have had a question come in. Oh, it is not a question. Well, it is a question, but I will answer this offline. All right, so I want to, first of all, thank Dr. Coles for the wonderful training today. Just want to let you guys know a few reminders. I will be sending out the link to the evaluation by this afternoon. Please complete that evaluation by Monday, December 16th, and I will send out the certificates by Wednesday, December 18th. Don't forget, if you join the webinar today via phone, to send me an email with your name and your phone number so I can make sure to get the evaluation to you. Last reminder is that we will not be having a training in January. We will be sending out the training schedule for 2020 very soon, hopefully in the next week here, but we will not be having a training in January, so we will regroup again in February. On that note, I do want to take time to thank all of you for your continued support of the Public Health Training Hui. We couldn't do this without you folks. We are very grateful for you, and on behalf of Hi-Fi and the Hui Steering Committee, I do want to wish you all a very happy and safe holidays. So mahalo again, and I will see you in February. Thank you.